Well, hello again, everyone. Thank you for that little impromptu opportunity to network. Next up, I'm really excited for this conversation. I've actually been waiting since Tuesday night with bated breath to be able to talk to Anthony about the elections. Let's see, do we have him?
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? I'm here.
Scaramucci, how are you?
Hey, good. Can you hear me okay?
I am well. I know
Good.
I'm probably pretty small on this stage. It's Erik LaPaglia.
Yeah,
So,
no, Eric, I can see you, Eric. I'm talking to you from an undisclosed location because I'm waiting for my deportation, so I can't really give up my address.
I don't think that's going to happen, but
I'm
I would
kidding.
love
I'm
to get
kidding.
you. First and foremost, I saw your post on, I still call it Twitter, on X, and
Yeah.
you took it. I mean, you said, "Hey, I made a mistake. I was wrong," but I really appreciated that. But I'd love to get a couple of minutes on where you think we're going from here. It seems like from a regulatory standpoint, it would be a seminal moment to give clarity in a way that we've just abdicated this last several years. So just a little bit, I mean, we'll leave some of the other stuff aside, but just on that specific topic.
If you don't mind, I think it's important to at least analyze something that people are thinking about, but I want to provide some empirical data. There was a meme going around last week for the Kamala team, which was an effective meme. It was a dad standing at a polling booth, and the little girl was asking the dad, "Who are you voting for?" And of course, the dad said, "Well, I'm voting for you." And the implication was the reproductive freedoms, and you're voting for a woman's liberality. But what actually happened, Eric, was an opposite meme. It was actually a mom standing there looking at her young son and the son asking that question, and the mom saying that she was voting for him. Because if you go to the exit polling, 46% of the women actually voted for Donald Trump. And when they were asked why, they said that they want an end to the cancel culture. They want an end to the woke culture that's putting an enormous amount of pressure on their children. And just one more piece of evidence, 18 to 36-year-old men are more prone to suicide than any other group in our demography. They have a 33% additional chance of committing suicide. And I think that this was a woke lash, if you will. If Trump's first election, Van Jones said it was a white lash against the Barack Obama movement. The second, the return of Donald Trump is, in my opinion, a woke lash. So I want to put that aside. You can ask me any question you want about that, or your people in the audience. But to talk specifically about our industry, Bitcoin, Propy, the things that are going to go on in our industry, it was very, very necessary to remove the likes of Elizabeth Warren's influence or Gary Gensler's influence. And I think the industry walloped them. And so, just so you know, we have 250 elected officials descending upon the Congress in January that are Bitcoiners or pro digital assets. The industry spent a fortune on different races. The most dramatic race, other than obviously the Trump Harris race, was the Sherrod Brown situation with Moreno in Ohio, and so $40 million got dumped into there. He was the antiquated head of the Senate Banking Committee. He had antiquated Warren-like views about everything, and I'm glad he's gone. And there is a silver lining. You know, my portfolio has done quite well since the election. There is a silver lining in that way. I just hope that the president elect, in the rhetoric that he was saying, in terms of what he was suggesting about deportations and using the American military to go after his political adversaries, I hope those are things that we're not going to have to take seriously, because I think that would damage the ethos of the country. But as it relates to our industry, I think the brightest days are ahead for our industry. And I just want to make one more point before you ask me another question. Elizabeth Warren is an ineffective senator. She only passed one bill in 12 years. She's been sent back to the Senate by the state of Massachusetts, but she is the most powerful person currently in the world of finance regulation in Washington. And I just want everybody to understand this. The job that she got from Joe Biden was, you're going to run things. She picked the SEC chairman. She picked the Secretary of Treasury. She sent staff into Treasury, SEC, the Fed, and the White House. the Saab 121 bill that Joe Biden vetoed, that was engendered by her staff inside the White House. When it got to his desk, he didn't really understand why he was vetoing it. He thought it was not that consequential. They came down on him hard. I know the backstory there because obviously I've been talking to the Democrats about this policy. So I'll leave you with this last thought. It's going to get better, but we have to make sure it gets better in a bipartisan way. Just trust me on that, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want a situation because of the polarizing nature of Donald Trump where he becomes the Bitcoin or the Propy Web3 property rights summit person, and the Democrats have no feeling for it because they react very emotionally to Donald Trump. And the example I can give you is what happened at the border. Joe Biden reversed every executive order. Those were good decisions by the Trump administration as it related to the border. People started to pour over the border again. And again, looking at the exit polling, that hurt the Democrats. And that was an overreaction by them to Trump's policies. We want to get them in place alongside of the Republicans in a bipartisan knitting so that we don't have to worry about this going forward in our industry.
Well, I think you unpacked a lot there, and the 2 points you made about Trump and some of the more, let's possibly use the word extreme rhetoric. I think any reasonable person hopes that that does not happen. But getting back to digital assets and the idea that it is a potentially partisan issue with Trump being the most visible friend of the industry, if you will, that's detrimental to the story of digital asset adoption. It's technology, and that's one thing that's flummoxed me for these last several years. Is it's never, at least in my lifetime, I've certainly never seen us forcibly push technology off of our shores. And so now that we seem to be having some sort of clarity, obviously the ETF's launch was kind of a seminal moment. You've been here, you were right from the start on this. Like, you and SkyBridge were some of the earliest mainstream Wall Street tradfi, if you'll use that terminology, folks to really start paying attention and deploying capital in this space. What do you see happening for the rest of the industry to really start embrace it? And I look at like what JP Morgan's doing with Onyx, certainly BlackRock now in very short order, 350 some odd thousand Bitcoins. Like, I see the major players getting involved, but how did the rest of the market start to participate in this space?
It's a fascinating question, and the good, we got here early. I got egg on my face for being early, and obviously, we were looking like genius. We bought in at 17,000 in 2020, and Bitcoin looked like geniuses by November of 2021, and then became dunces in 2022. But thankfully, we stayed the course. We actually added more Bitcoin, more Solana, et cetera. And so we're in a pretty good position today. But what I would say to you is that the industry now has the open horizon of regulatory friendliness, ETFs that have been codified by the SEC, and a legion. And when I say a legion, it's tens of thousands of people on Wall Street that are now going to be articulating the story of whether it's a Bitcoin, a Bitcoin ETF, an Ethereum ETF, perhaps even eventually a Solana ETF, where people will be adding these things to their portfolios. And that's coming. It didn't come as fast as we expected. Of course, I got that wrong in terms of timing, but I don't think I've gotten that wrong in terms of direction. So those things are coming, and they're going to ramp fairly quickly. And I think there's something out there that the marketplace hasn't fully understood yet. And I think we should address it right here at your summit. And that is the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, you were with me in Wyoming in August. I mean, we did a contemporaneous conference to the Federal Reserve meetings. We did a decentral banking meeting in Wyoming. And Senator Loomis was there with Senator Scott, both of which are going to have very powerful positions. Scott on the Senate Banking Committee, replacing Sherrod Brown. And what I would say to you is that there's legislation in place to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve, Erik. And if the United States purchases 1 million Bitcoins at the current price of 76 or 77 billion US dollars, and we lead the world and having a gold reserve and a potential Bitcoin on our Fed balance sheet, it's going to force the other central banks into the marketplace. And so I don't think people understand how exponential this is. With Bitcoin at about a 1.4, $1.5 trillion market cap, it's priced like the Magnificent Seven in terms of it being a stock, if you will. But it's not a stock, it's an asset class. And its nearest asset is gold. And so to me, if we get this right, we continue to execute, we get legislation passed like that, uh, over time, it's not going to happen immediately, but over time, Bitcoin should at least trade at the market capitalization of gold. And so I would tell people in the room that you're sitting in or on television or wherever I can meet people, we are very, very early in the digital asset story. And how does this relate to Propy and things related to your summit? Is as Bitcoin rises, other things in the ecosystem become easier. There's more liquidity, there's more access points, there's more flow into the marketplace. The ideas of what Propy is doing, which is a brilliant strategy on your part, become part of the fabric. They become a fait accompli. Yesterday, I gave the analogy of a long distance phone call. I'm old enough to remember when I was calling my mom from Europe in the 1980s, it was $5 a minute. Today, it's no dollars a minute. We spend $7 trillion in our society on transactions, wiring fees, credit card fees, all sorts of third party verification. We're using all different types of people. And we also have almost 60% of our assets that are illiquid. This would include real estate, it would include collectibles, it would include our cars. There's just not a lot of things that are liquid. Stocks and bonds are liquid. But imagine a place like Propy, where you could have a tokenization or a digitalization of these assets where they can be fractionalized and they can be put into the system, and they can be transacted upon at very, very low cost. And the example I gave yesterday is I could be walking around with a stable coin on my phone, a piece of property that I own that's tokenized on my phone. How about a tokenized share of Starbucks? It's on my phone. I walk into Starbucks, they're doing a share repurchase program, and they turn to me and say, hey, if you beam your share to us or a portion of your share to us, we'll give you a 20% discount on the food or the beverage that you're buying. You know, the whole world is about to take a quantum shift and a quantum change. It was held back by czarist-like decisions from Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler. And by the way, it didn't serve anybody's interest to be that anti-crypto. It didn't serve anybody's interest in the Electoral College. It certainly didn't serve anybody's interest in terms of running in the House of Representatives or the Senate. And I think we know the answer to why they were so negative. It was very personal to them. They spent a lot of time with the Bankman-Frieds, Sam's parents. They were law professors at Stanford. Warren was a law professor at Harvard. They were trying to convince her to give their son regulatory approval and margin approval for FTX. And of course, he blew up in 22. And in order to eclipse the closeness that the two of them had to Sam, they went very irrationally hard at our industry. And it cost the Democrats. It didn't just cost the Democrats at the presidency. And one would argue that even if they were pro Bitcoin, she would have lost that race to Donald Trump. But it definitely cost them in the House of Representatives and definitely cost them in the Senate. Just look at the Sherrod Brown race. So big days ahead for us. We just got to make sure that we get the macros right. I don't want to give up Ukrainian territory to Vladimir Putin. I don't want the United States coming out of NATO. These alliances are super important to commerce. Believe it or not, we take for granted our free shipping and our free Navy lanes around the world. We don't want the United States to retrench or become isolationist. It will hurt us in business, which affects the stock market and other asset prices. But if we get those big macros right, we're heading into a very blue sky environment for our industry.
Well, you touched on what I think is probably the most vital component of what will be a huge swing of mass adoption, which is the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Bill. And we actually had Senator Loomis on this morning speaking about just that. Um, the picture that you paint is so rosy, and I agree with it. But what do you see as specific opportunities or a specific catalyst that will take place for broader adoption overall?
Yeah. Okay. So let me, because I'm a lifetime skeptic. I get paid to manage risk. So let me explain to you why it's so rosy to me, because we've seen the movie before. When Mark Andreessen launched the Netscape browser, and we saw this unbelievable world of possibilities now that we had this other medium that we could transact in. Yeah, certainly some of that stuff went bust, but the big macro things did quite well. That's what's happening now. You're going into a permissionless transaction society. You're going into a sovereign individual society where I could hold my Bitcoin or my assets on a USB, as a result of which I don't necessarily have to have it custodied at a bank or someplace like that. So I want to explain why I'm so bullish. The meta forces around us are the ones that are going to take us into the future, whether we like it or not. But specifically, if you're asking me specifically on the asset class side, I would say Bitcoin to me is going to be a gold equivalent, a digital gold. It's more portable, it's easier to use than gold, so it may even become more valuable than gold. Other assets, whether it's Ethereum, Solana, things like Avalanche, Polkadot, these will be rail systems that we're going to use. Propy is going to use these. I don't know which ones you're looking.
Filecoin.
I'm sorry, Filecoin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Filecoin, I've met with those guys. They have a brilliant business, and they are doing something unique on the layer one space. And so your stuff's going to sit on top of Filecoin and its rail system, and it's going to be it's going to be one of the leaders. Again, think of it like the web and the cloud. The cloud, it was hard to get it adopted. It was hard to understand it, but there wasn't just one cloud provider. There's 15 or 20, possibly more gigantic cloud providers. That'll be the same thing with these layer ones. You'll pick the one that's best for you and for your business. You'll set your assets or your contracts on top of those, and you'll transact. So these things to me, there's now a clear runway for them to happen. Gensler has to be embarrassed with himself because at one point he's saying that Ripple is a security. He loses the court case. He's then saying, well, Ethereum's not a security, but Ripple and Ethereum have many of the same characteristics. Okay, and that there's something in the code called arbitrary and capricious, and you lose those court cases every time that's presented to the court. The court says, hey, Gary, you can't say that an apple isn't an apple. Don't pretend that an apple's an orange when it's in fact an apple. And so therefore you lose the court case. And so now you'll get stablecoin legislation, which will provide great clarity. You'll get token security commodity definitions that'll come from the House and Senate, which provide great clarity. You'll have people at the SEC, the Warren minions will likely not stay because they're in appointed positions. And you'll get people at the SEC that are in the Jay Clayton mode that are agnostic to the politics. I think one of the stupidest things that we've done in the last decade is we've weaponized these agencies. We've turned the administrative state into agents of politics. The better systems take an apolitical approach to the regulation. In the UAE, and I've met with those guys many times, and you've met with them. You saw some of them at our conference in Wyoming. The UAE is about right or wrong regulation. What's good for the consumer? What's good for the country? It's not about left or right regulation. How can we impose our will on people that may or may not want our will? So to me, I look at our situation, and I see things like Propy doing amazingly well over the next 5 to 10 years.
You couldn't give us a better commercial, so thank you for that. We are running short on time, but I did actually want to say, or ask you rather, if the new administration extended an opportunity for you to opine or participate in some of the shaping of the regulatory environment that we all believe will be coming, is that something you'd be able to or willing to bury the hatchet and
Of
participate in?
course. Now, listen, I'm an American. Donald
Yeah.
Trump is going to be our president. And so I want him to succeed. This is not about, I said my piece. I issued a warning of what 40 of us saw while he was president the first time. And the people said, yeah, we heard that and we want him to be our president. So he's our president. He's the president for everybody. And I wish him well. If they asked me to help them, which I think is a very unlikely thing that they would do, but if they asked me to help them, of course I would be willing to help them because we got to get this right. We got to get this right for everybody. I think one of the ways I've already helped, and I don't mean to be patting myself on the back, but I think I've softened, and I think, Mark Cuban deserves a lot of credit for this. So does Mike Novogratz. I think we've softened the position of many of these people. The Winklevosses are teasing about choke point 2.0 now becoming the Heimlich 1.0. Meaning we're going to now see access to banking in a way better way than we did during the Biden administration. But you do need support from the Democrats to get a lot of this stuff done. And so I'm going to continue to work with them. And I'm going to continue to explain to them, whether it's the Ro Khannas of the world, Senator Gillibrand, who's my senator here in New York, Senator Schumer. In my private conversations with these people, they recognize that we need stablecoin and we need cryptocurrency and digital asset legislation in the first part of the next congressional term. And they also recognize if it's bipartisan, it's going to be healthier for everybody. It's going to be less divisive, if you will. And I hope that will be the case. So yeah, I would happily help anybody who thought I could be helpful to them in advancing our industry.
I'm glad you brought up Representative Khanna because I think he's got a really good grasp of this industry and could be very, very helpful helping bridge the divide between
He's
the
the
two parties.
best.
He really is. Anthony, you're the best. I really
Hey,
appreciate your
thank
time.
you.
Thank you so much for doing this. And
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, Eric, just make sure there's a place in your house somewhere if I need to hide out,
You have
and
safe
make sure it's
harbor.
better accommodations than what Anne Frank had, if you don't mind. All right.
You'll have safe harbor, my friend.
Okay. Thank you, man.